that shareable with us?
Yes, I'll post it on my website for you if you'd like.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I will also post my PowerPoint presentation on my website, and the contact information is at the end of my presentation because we obviously didn't have time to get you handouts for my presentation. Luckily, you have Kevin's though, so it's like you got 2 for 1, which is great. All right, so let's get started, and we're going to start with this focus on technology, and I tend to focus my work on the adolescent mind, but a lot of this applies to younger children as well. I just happen to be a teen-focused individual, so. We are seeing some very interesting and somewhat disturbing trends in adolescent development in particular as we look at the brain. And we're now willing to call that evolution of the brain within one generation, which is unheard of, to say that evolution happens in one generation. And yet the physiological differences in how the brain functions from the last generation to this one are significant enough that we're willing to say that some evolution is taking place. The current explosion of digital technology not only is changing the way we live and communicate, but is rapidly and profoundly altering our brains. An example of this, there was a study that was done using Google with, shall we say, people of advanced age. And they were brought in, and some of these individuals had used Google extensively, and some of them had never seen it before. And so through functional MRI, they looked at what the patterns in the brain were as these individuals were just doing basic searches on Google. And obviously there were differences. You've probably read some of the literature on expert versus novice brain patterns and things like that. So we can definitely see differences in the parts of the brain that were being used to do it. Now, for most things, to become an expert takes, you've heard the 10,000 hours rule, right? Within 5 days, these people's brains had completely changed in their use of Google. So 5 days of being taught how to use it, and by the end their brains looked just like the experts when they were using Google. So I mean, a very insignificant task to search on the web, but to see the brain altered that quickly, that's a profound difference. So perhaps not since early man first discovered how to use a tool has the human brain been affected so quickly and dramatically. And this is from Gary Small's work. So let's talk about some characteristics of the digital mind of kids this day and age. We're seeing stunted frontal lobe development. What happens in the frontal lobes? Can anybody tell me?
Executive function.
Executive function is up there. What else?
Affective influence.
Yes, emotional regulation. Good. Anything else? Basically all of the stuff that makes us functioning adult humans, right?
Differentiation and discernment.
Yes. Okay. So we've got critical thinking, problem solving. I mean, obviously it doesn't do it by itself, right? But critical thinking, problem solving, planning, consideration of consequences, emotional regulation, executive function, all of that regulatory stuff takes place up here. And a generation ago, we would have said that those lobes of the brain were pretty much fully developed by about age 20 to 25. And now we're looking more at the 25 to 35 range on average. And so we're seeing a slowdown in that development, meaning that students, children, individuals in our society are less able to some extent to regulate their emotions and to plan for the future and to think critically. Okay?
That explains a lot.
It doesn't though?
Seriously, about the last 2 years.
Yeah. And now you couple this with earlier and earlier onset of puberty.
Right.
So we have now both boys and girls starting puberty at an average age of about 11 years old. So if you consider, and I hate to lay it on the boys, but I'm going to for just a second. Guys, you're great. Happy Valentine's Day. But a boy starting puberty at 11, influx of testosterone, lack of frontal lobe development. So we've got now a 20-year period, up to a 20-year period of adolescence. And that's fairly frightening, to put it frankly. Okay. All right. This is no surprise to any of you in this room if you've spent any time with a teenager. We're seeing a loss of fundamental social and communication skills. And this is particularly in face-to-face environments, right? You watch your kids and they're sitting right next to each other, texting each other, rather than communicating. Now, interestingly, their empathy has not significantly reduced. Rather, their empathy has changed venue. So they'll walk down the hall and see a friend that they know maybe just broke up with a boyfriend. And they'll do this. Okay? And then they'll go to Facebook. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do for you? Yeah. So they're equally empathetic. They love each other and they show that love for one another in a completely different venue. And so we're seeing this loss of social skills and communication skills in the face-to-face environment. Along with that is artificial intimacy. So I know exactly what color my cousin painted her living room. I know what her wedding plans are. I know what color her hair has been dyed. I have not seen her in 3 years. Yeah. I have liked her posts on Facebook. So we have this intimate, wonderful, best friendly relationship, don't we? But when we see each other, it's actually kind of awkward because it's artificial. It's artificial intimacy. They are using their brains in different ways to process language. And their language, quite frankly, is different. So, for example, with emoticons, right? When we would write a letter to a friend, we would say, oh, I just got a new job and I'm so excited. And we would read that, and our brain processes it as language, and it inspires the emotion and all of that good stuff, right? These kids will put, I just got a new job, smiley emoticon. And us old folks will read that and still say, I'm so excited, yay, in our heads. We'll like translate it into language. They keep it as an image. Yeah. Another shocker. They have shorter attention span. Now notice this though, particularly for traditional forms of learning. So in other words, this environment. So a lecture-based environment, reading in textbooks, those kinds of things, that's where their attention span is shorter. Now I think that is a signal to us. Not that we should become entertainers and clowns in our classrooms, but that perhaps these modes of educating are not what is optimal for this generation. And so we need to be looking into more learner-centered approaches to teaching that really engage the students and bring them on board, and that's what we're going to be talking about in large part today. Okay? I find it very interesting. A large number of students were interviewed and asked about their book reading. I don't know if you've read about this, but readership as far as literary readership, sitting down and reading books, is down, some estimates up to 20–25%. That's not readership total, because they read a lot more than we did in 140 characters or less, right? So they read their little texts and their Facebook posts and their tweets, and so there's these little chunks, but they're not sitting down and reading books. And what these kids said in the interviews was that sitting down and reading a book makes them feel isolated. Now as adults, we're like, yes, I'm isolated, thank you. We love it. But they feel like literally it's a physical barrier that they're putting in front of their face and blocking themselves from the world. And in modern society, as we'll see, that's actually a form of social suicide. All right. So, if these are the impacts, why? What's going on that's causing these changes? In your tables, brainstorm for a minute. Come up with as many things as you possibly can that have happened in the last 20 years that may have caused these changes. All right, you got a minute. Go.
But I think for the social aspect, that's what Facebook.
And I think that parents don't feel comfortable sending their kids
They
outside.
see that disconnect. I mean, really,
That is the one that makes it anything they're not play video games, no different things, they're not getting that exercise and social action or hours.
they can show tweets, they can show Facebook. They don't want to do that. Emails, whole videos, they want to tweet or Facebook. That's their task. When they do something, they take that in.
All right, Ralph, your current comment?
They don't have it. The area they
All right, folks, here we go. So I'm going to put up on the projectors some things that I think are correlated, for sure. Now, can we prove causation on anything? I would love to see you try to raise one of today's adolescents in a quiet room with no access to technology as your control. Doesn't? Okay, no. All right, so we have a lot of correlates that have happened in the last 20 years, and let's go through a few of them, and if I don't hit any, let me know. So, television. Yeah. This is interesting. A lot of people think, well, kids don't watch television that much anymore. But even the most recent data coming out of the Pew Foundation is telling us that kids are spending, on average, 8 to 8.5 hours a day consuming media. Now, let's stop for just a minute. Those are real-time hours, meaning like from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., right? Okay, so 8 hours. That does not extrapolate all of the media that you could be consuming at the same time. So when you look at all of the media that they consume at the same time, there are estimates of up to, and I don't know how I feel about this, but I'm going to spew it out there anyway, 20 hours a day. With all of the devices going on at the same time. Waha. Okay, now, great, 8 to 8.5 hours of media consumption a day. They're still watching about 4 hours of TV. And TV is our biggest enemy as far as technology is concerned because it's almost completely passive. You sit and you watch. Yeah, I would rather my kids play video games any day than watch television. Because at least they're thinking and they're moving and they're doing things rather than pulling the lump and listening to the laugh track. Okay. Yeah. Now we were joking up here before my session started because as I got on the airplane I had to pull out my 3 Apple devices of varying sizes and put them on the conveyor. And the TSA guys didn't like that really much. Okay. But we have these devices in our pockets all the time. What's the problem with that?
Constant access.
Yeah, constant
It's an
access.
addiction. That is an addiction.
Yeah, I mean,
It's an addiction.
we can call it that.
It's immediate.
Yeah. Okay, it's this immediacy of information. How many of you have experienced waiting without one of your devices lately? It's really hard. It is so hard to just stand there. Yeah, I took my kids to Disneyland and I'm like just standing in line. I'm like, dude, what am I supposed to do? Because we're so used to that. I don't know a fact. Oh, here, let me look it up. Or, oh, let me check what's going on Facebook while I'm sitting here waiting for something. So it's really made it so that our brains never have a period of rest. Yeah, there's our friend. There it is. Now, let's talk about this one for just a minute, okay? I know that we've heard about Facebook addiction and Facebook disorder. There were all kinds of names for it. I like the disorder name. I think that was great. There was a really interesting interview done last year with a couple of 13, 14-year-old girls. So a very small sample, obviously. But an interesting discussion ensued. So they were asked why they're on Facebook all the time. Is this an addiction? Is it a compulsion that they just can't resist? And to some extent it is. I think we've all felt that, like, oh, I have to check Facebook, I must check Facebook. But these girls weren't saying that. What they were saying was that their social world takes place online. And not responding to a Facebook post, not going on and liking the post or commenting on it, is akin to walking down the hall at school and just turning your head to your friends. Which for us would have been, as I referred to earlier, social suicide, right? You can't do that to your friends. And so now, as their friends are posting on Facebook, they have a friend responsibility to go on and like and to comment and to do all of these things. And not only that, because their social world has moved online, if they're not there in that world, then they don't know what's going on. And things are being said behind their backs, and they're not participating in the discussion and all of these types of issues. So this is what these very eloquent 13 and 14-year-old girls were saying about Facebook and why they use it so heavily. And then parents and educators got on the comments at the end of this interview. There was a space for comments. And we're like, well, that's just ridiculous. They need to get over it. And I felt this horrible disconnect between what these girls were trying to express. Look, it's not this uncontrollable compulsion. It's that if I want to survive in high school, I have to. And then us, as older individuals, not really understanding what that means to them, because the social climate is so vastly different from what we experience. Now, you can't see this picture very well. We know the texting. We're familiar with the texting. Their thumbs are quite adept, very agile. But this person's actually texting in bed, and I heard you ladies talking about this. Can you elaborate on that? Yeah, what's their bedtime?
9:30.
Maybe 9, 9:30, 10, 11. We don't know. Unless you're taking their devices away before they hit this app, it's very likely that they're staying up later and later, right? Now, let's connect this idea of them texting in bed and staying up too late with the circadian rhythms of adolescence, right? So we know little kids release their dopamine about 7, 8 p.m. and start to feel sleepy, and then they need about 10 to 12 hours of sleep. Okay. When puberty hits, a little bit before maybe, that changes, that cycle changes. And so adolescents don't start to feel sleepy until maybe 10, 11, 12 at night. So it's not that they're being rebellious and saying, I don't want to go to bed, I'm exerting my authority. They honestly are sleepy. And then, what time does high school start? Yeah. 7:30, which means kids are getting on the bus at maybe 6:30, which means they're getting up, depending on how you do your hair. For me, 6:15. But for other kids, 5:30, they're getting up. Adolescents still need 9 to 10 hours of sleep a night. And so they're coming to high school classrooms right at the dip in their circadian cycle, right when they're at their most exhausted, when they should still be asleep. So they're really significantly sleep deprived. And that, of course, has an impact on the brain and how it functions. What do you think this picture represents?
Kids in control.
Kids in control. Yeah. Permissive parenting. Permissive parenting. Those parents who are just saying, my life was so hard, I want your life to be easier, so I'm going to give you more and not ask as much of you. Please.
Well, it's also like kids understanding the tools of the time better than the adults.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Very nice. Thank you. So we're not asking very much of them, and they know more about this stuff than we do anyway. It's really difficult for them to start thinking critically and taking responsibility. It's just not being asked of them. They have so many ways around it.
It's like children of immigrants who speak the culture's language and their parents may not.
Right?
So, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I sincerely consider technology to be a language to be learned. Yeah. All right. How many of you have these for breakfast? All right. Obviously, we have extraordinarily poor nutrition, right? The fast food, processed, high carbohydrate diets of the last 20 years have really negatively impacted us as well, as far as the brain is concerned. Environmental toxins, holy hell yes. I am so very proud to currently hail from the state with the 5 worst cities for air quality. Go Utah. Yeah. Beautiful state. Just don't be in a city in the winter.
Doesn't have to be a big city.
No.
Logan's bad.
Yeah. Even our small cities. Yeah, we have terrible inversions, and then it's just okay. All right. So we've got environmental toxins, and that, by the way, is most likely the cause of the earlier puberty. All of the environmental toxins that we've got going on. You may not be able to see this in the back, so I'll read it for you. The mom is saying, see, this is called the outdoors. And the boy says, oh, I've seen this level on my video games. Yeah. So we've got severe nature deprivation going on in our kids, and we now have data that shows that nature calms the brain and gives us moments to reflect and to think and to learn new things without a screen. They're deprived of nature in part because of our own fears as adults of what they'll encounter when they go outside, but we're also losing our green spaces, and we have less and less time to go into green spaces. All right, did I not get any of your ideas? Can anybody think of something else that might be causing these problems?
We were kind of saying that, I mean, we kind of know all this. Like, we know nature's supposed to that. We know all this.
Right.
So why have we let it happen?
Exactly.
So whether it's a lack of research or that media, and it's come so far so quickly and kept changing, and there wasn't research to really say, hold on, and watch out. And
Yes, and now we've got ourselves kind of stuck into this competitive economy-focused corner. I don't know how many of you have seen a documentary that's out right now called Schooling the World. I personally experienced a severe existential crisis after watching it. But it's about this very idea of how kids are taken from their kind of very traditional agrarian cultural homes. And they focus on a gorgeous farming valley in India. And they take these kids out of their homes and put them into a Western school. All put them in a box, memorize these facts, repeat them back on the test, oriented. And these kids go back to their farming villages and they don't know how to do anything. So then they move to New Delhi, where they get a job and live in a slum. Have we improved their lives in some way? And so we're robbing these agrarian societies of their culture and of their people, and eventually they will disappear, and we'll lose that way of life in favor of this. So it's profound. If you want a good hour of leaping and doubting your existence, watch it. I mean, all my students do it. It's called Schooling the World. It's available in like partitions on YouTube right now, but also you can download it for $5, $15, or $25. Sorry, I'm like way into this movie right now. So, but if you just go to schoolingtheworld.org, you can find it there.
I think some of this whole deal with this, to me, is this like love affair with the new in our culture.
Yes.
We have this consumptive mentality, and you know, it's like gotta have it, gotta have it, gotta have it. And then the way the technology's changing more and more and more, and there's this kind of weird underlying greed.
Yes.
And a fear of lack. You know, like if I don't have it or I don't understand it, you know, I'm lacking in some way. And it seems to propel it forward to me.
Yeah, were you able to hear that in the back? That we're very focused on that. We have a very consumptive society, that we're so focused on getting things and acquiring things, that that's really what drives us.
Please, and also, is required, because there's article in the paper I read the other day, as of such and such a date coming up this year, it's going to be required of people to do their IRS or their bank deposits online.
Yes.
And then, you know, look at the whole baby boom situation, or older people who have not had all that technology coming up, and how is that going to affect everything? And
Excellent
how-
point.
So it's not only that we want, but yes, you better do it too.
Yeah.
So you get that.
So technology and sitting in front of screens used to be a choice, and it's becoming less and less so. Good, please.
And it seems to me too that we've been instructing kids for so long, and now we need to have them experience more what they want to learn. It's by experiencing, and that's what they're doing, they're rebelling on this experiencing by doing all their techno things.
Right? And I have not put an acronym with which we are all familiar and may or may not have ranted against that happened 15, 20 years ago up there. Little No Child Left Behind action.
A little.
Okay, but the accountability movement in schools that moved towards more of a rote memorization and testing environment certainly correlates with these changes as well.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
One thing too, that I've observed with young families is that the parents actually want their children to be in a technology environment.
Sure.
But they don't know why. So often, because I just asked the question, what type of employment will be waiting on these kids? Do you want to be in the geek squad?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure that people really know, and of course the jobs will change, but at the same time, I'm not sure that they know what that guidance means. It's
Exactly.
limited.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to go there in a little bit because we are part of the problem. We know technology is the future, but we know so little about it that we may be leading them astray ourselves.
Yes.
All right, so what has resulted from all of this popular culture and all of our devices and everything that's going on in the world is now a phenomenon or a state called continuous partial attention. You refer to it all the time as feeling always on, right? So it's this sensation that you're always tuned in, turned on, plugged in to a lot of things at the same time, hence the partial attention, right? We know that you can't multitask. Your brain cannot multitask. It task switches. So we go into one thing and back out, and into another thing and back out. We make a lot of mistakes, and it takes us a while to switch between tasks, right? These kids are faster at it. They make fewer mistakes. And so they kind of have this continual simmer going on where there are all these devices and they're connected all of the time and they're having to watch everything. And do you see my body language? And even talking about it, my shoulders are starting to rise and I'm feeling anxious about it. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening in these kids. Notice he's texting under his desk. Do you think he's learning from his teacher? All right. In a recent study, students felt compelled to answer the buzz. So even if they had their phone turned to vibrate and it didn't make a noise, they just felt it. I mean, literally physical sensation. I gotta get that, is how they feel. When they don't answer it, even when they're not getting text and nothing's buzzing, they're continuously thinking about what's happening in the digital world. Oh, I wonder if she posted that on Facebook yet. Oh, I hope she didn't tell anybody about that. Right? 75, this floored me. 75% of teens and young adults check their devices every 15 minutes or less. Or less.
Or less, right.
But notice this. If they're not allowed to do so, they get anxious. Not angry. Anxious. And we know anxiety impairs learning. Okay. Some teachers have gone so far as to introduce technology breaks in their classrooms, meaning that every 15 minutes or so, okay, we need a break from instruction anyway, right, because their attention spans are shorter. So every 15 minutes, pull out your devices, check them, get it off your chest. Okay, now put them back away. And actually, they found that by doing that, they're able to train their students to wait for longer periods of time. So the first week they do it, okay, let's every 10 minutes we'll have a tech break. Okay, now we're going to move it to 15. Now we're going to move it to 20, 25. And the kids get better at it, right? And then they get to say things like, that mean Mrs. Cox won't let me check my texts in class. And I tell them that's totally okay to say that. Go for it. Okay? Now, another recent study by Larry Rosen. They watched kids doing homework. This fascinated me. So the kids knew they were being watched. They went home with them and watched them do homework for 15 minutes. We can do 15 minutes, right? They could only stay on task for 3 to 5 minutes before they got distracted. And this is with people watching them. And they, I mean, obviously they're watching them do their homework, right? So you'd think they'd be very diligent. But within 3 to 5 minutes, they were already off task.
Can I just ask, is this looking specific, like, there are some children who are not exposed to media, I mean, like my kid, for example. Not like Helen. But is this true for children who are exposed to, and they have their own devices as much as children who
Yes.
are not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're also somehow affected by the media around whether they use it or not?
Yes, exactly right. Now, this is like the famous Stanford marshmallow test. Okay? If you've seen it, read it, if you haven't watched the video, oh my goodness, it's the most hilarious thing in the world. I'll summarize it for those of you who haven't heard about it. For the Stanford marshmallow test, they brought 4-year-olds, one at a time, into an interview room and placed in front of them with a marshmallow. Now, have any of you seen a 4-year-old with a marshmallow? Normally you don't see it because they eat it so fast, you never actually see the marshmallow. But they sat these kids down and they said, I am so sorry, I know we're supposed to talk for a few minutes, but I have to go talk with my friend really fast. If you can wait till I come back, you can have 2 marshmallows. But if you can't wait, you can go ahead and eat this one. And then they leave the room. And a third of the kids immediately go, home. And the other 2/3 do this. And they'll sit down because here's the marshmallow and they like smell it. And they lick it, and some of them will pick it up and take a bite out of the bottom and put it back down. Hilarious. They followed up on the kids from the original study, and this has been duplicated with different items to make sure it wasn't like, oh, some kids don't just don't like marshmallows, but they've done it with a bunch of different things. And when you do the follow-up, these kids at 17 and 18 years of age had higher GPAs, higher SAT scores, rated themselves as happier and more successful than kids who could wait. Right? Yeah. Yeah. And later on, it's their ability to delay gratification, their emotional intelligence is an even better predictor of success and happiness in life than IQ is. Right? So this is identical with the technology. Okay, so here are these kids sitting around. Generally, 3 to 5 minutes is all they can do. What are they seeing in this study? Well, they're sitting in their study environment surrounded by laptops and phones and iPads and all kinds of stuff. iPods, the headphones are in while they're trying to do their homework at the same time, right? The kids that could wait. So they did a follow-up to this particular study where they brought the kids in and they had them watch a video, an instructional video, and then take a test at the end. And they texted them, the researchers texted the kids while they were watching the video and instructed the kids to reply to the text. The kids who had to read the text immediately and reply immediately felt they needed to, obviously failed the test miserably. But there were some kids who said, okay, I got the text, I'm going to wait until there's a boring part of the video that I don't think is going to be on the test. And then I'll reply. And those kids did significantly better. So there is this element of, is part of the problem that we're not teaching them to delay gratification and to use metacognitive skills and say, wait, now's not the time, I'll come back to this. So this immediacy problem. All right, I'm just going to keep keeping it on. The whole first section is just to make us feel miserable and awful. Okay. You may have heard about things called the flat world and globalization, how our world is becoming smaller and smaller because of all of this access that we have. I can communicate with people in Bangladesh, and I can have Facebook friends that are in India, and my world is huge but small, right? But what's happening, the small world paradox, is that as our collective world gets smaller, as we globalize, our personal worlds, our personal lives have gotten so much more complex and so much bigger, and there's so many more pulls on our time and our minds. Oh, and by the way, we get to be older too. So we get to endure this for longer. That's great. So my question at the end of this, this is a conference on creativity. If all of this is happening, where we have continuous partial attention, our lives are more complex, we have instant access to information, our devices are always on, where on earth is the space for creativity? Where is that supposed to happen? There's a great quote. It is not by George Carlin. Everybody thinks it is online, but it's not. It's by a Christian preacher. And this is a short version of it that I think summarizes so beautifully what's going on in our society. We have taller buildings but shorter tempers. Wider freeways but narrower viewpoints. We retain more information but less wisdom. We have more leisure and less fun. When was the last time you laughed yourself silly? More conveniences, yet less time. More medicine, less wellness. More kinds of food, but less nutrition. We have more media, but less communication. More acquaintances, but less friends. Increased our possessions, but reduced our values. We have conquered outer space, but neglected inner space. We have smashed the atom, but not our prejudices. We've done all these amazing things and expanded our world and made things so easy and wonderful, and maybe lost the beauty of it all. So why am I here? My presentation's about technology. And my message is don't unplug them. Some of you have already hinted at what the answer may be. So let's start to move there. And I want to begin by saying that there are good characteristics of today's adolescents. Some of them I didn't even put on this slide. Volunteerism is up. Okay, kids are volunteering more and more now than ever before. That's fantastic, right? Average IQ scores have been rising for the last 50 years. So in theory, they're getting smarter. In theory. Okay. Like I said earlier, their ability to switch tasks without errors is improving. So they can switch between things a lot faster and make fewer errors when they do it. They react more quickly to visual stimuli, which is associated with improvements in certain parts of the brain. Their peripheral attention, for example, is much better than an older individual's is. And I think this has significant implication for educators in the room, right? We went through an interesting little cycle with our visual processing in the brain. I mean, visual processing takes up almost 50% of our brain power. We are visual beings. But it's not always as important to us. When we were cavemen, and our brains are still pretty much caveman brains, yes? More or less. When we were cavemen, we had to use vision constantly to survive, right? We had to look and see, oh, there's a saber-toothed tiger, I should run now. So that was very important for us. Spatial orienting was also very important to us, right? I don't need to spatial orient anymore. I've got my GPS on my phone, so I'm good to go. I have no sense of direction whatsoever. Thank goodness I live in Utah, where the streets are labeled east and north. Then I'm good.
Grid, right? It's a grid.
Yes, it's a grid. It's awesome. Okay. So we kind of had a dip for a while as we got into the Industrial Revolution and things, that visual processing wasn't as important. But now with modern technologies, they respond much more quickly and learn much more quickly and efficiently from visual stimuli than they do from auditory information. So we've got more and more visual learners as well as kinesthetic learners, kids that need to use their bodies, many of whom are misdiagnosed as having ADHD because they simply need to move to learn, and they're not allowed to do so. They've got improved ability to sift through large amounts of information. So sometimes when we watch them surf the net, we're like, holy cow, they go so fast through pages, and we think it's this digital ADD, that they just are so distracted by everything that they're just cruising through the pages. But actually within 2 seconds, the average adolescent can tell whether a web page they're looking at will have the information they need. Very, very quick about figuring out where things are in the digital world. So I believe there is unprecedented potential here. We simply aren't tapping into it. So here we go. Technology's incredible potential. I'm going to show you what I think is the coolest video of all time. How's that for a setup? Do that in a million years. And 50 years ago, nobody could have done that. I mean, that's an amazing thing. And so we know that technology can do incredible, incredible things. So let's start first by defining creativity. All right. So let's stand up. Because we know if you don't get oxygen flowing to your brain, it's going to shut down. So let's stand up. And let's do 2 tables together. Little round table discussion for a minute. What is creativity? How's that for an early morning question?
Thank you. That's such great, and I love your style. You're doing such a great job. What part of the definition that says the ability
Actually, everybody recommended to
So it gives you about 30 seconds to finish defining one of the most challenging concepts in the history of humankind.
Yeah, I mean, your question is, yeah. There's times when we have to do that first.
It's also manipulated in terms of the process and
All right, when your group feels comfortable, go ahead and sit back down.
Well, our decision all the time.
All right, I'm going to do the junior high school countdown in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What I find entertaining is that that works for the majority of people, even though I have no consequence whatsoever if you don't stop talking. Right. It's just, you know, when talking about compulsions.
It's going to technology, concepts, and
All right. So what I'd like to hear from you, and I want to start all the way to the back. I want to hear some key words from you. What is creativity? Throw out a couple of key words that your groups were talking about back there. Change. Good. What else have we got? Say that again. Fun. Nice. I love that. Okay. Let's come forward. Kind of back third there. What words do you have for us?
I'm afraid I did most of the talking, so maybe someone else would like to.
Go ahead.
One of the things that he had mentioned that we began to discuss was he had mentioned the concept of an unknown process.
Oh.
And I wasn't really sure what he meant by an unknown process, and he linked it to, we linked it to artistic creativity. And I asked in that context, what would an unknown process be described as? And we were starting to get into that when we came back here. Do you have any words on that maybe you could share with us?
Yeah, I actually love that idea, this idea of an ill-defined problem with no set algorithm or process that you have to follow, but it's really this more kind of organic, naturally occurring thing. What were you thinking of when you said that?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was saying. I was thinking in terms of problem, process, and product, and put these three more concepts: parameters, constants, and variables. So you could have a well-defined problem and an unknown process, and therefore product. You could have a well-defined process, but an ill-structured problem, and then of course you don't know what the product is going to be. You could have a pretty clear idea of what the endpoint is going to be. We would all like to solve various health issues or the climate problem, but then you're not sure exactly how to define the problem or the process in getting there. So by using the concepts of parameters, variables, and constants, applying them to the three components of problem definition, process, and the result, the product. And then the final thing is, to kind of summarize it, is that creativity then becomes the known, using the known to address or explain the unknown.
Very nice. Oh, I like that. Good. Did anybody else, speaking of visual processing, imagine that whole grid he was just talking about in their heads? I'm like checking off boxes in an imaginary grid in my head. Okay. All right, now we know a little too much about me. Okay. Let's see, this kind of middle section here, keywords.
Oh, I'm sorry. That what you're talking about, your thing, is that how you said unique to you? Is that because you kind of you gravitate towards technology, and technology is kind of?
It's entirely possible. So nature, nurture, right? We don't know anymore.
So do you think that in a technology-based classroom, their minds would be organized more efficiently? Or?
They would be organized
Differently, but not necessarily more efficiently. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. What else have we got? Keywords for creativity.
Well, I'm not sure I can limit it one word, but it's a mindset that seeks novelty and ongoing exploration. So anything that is the antithesis of a static mindset.
Very nice.
Freedom to explore.
Freedom to explore. Okay?
I was just gonna say it's personal, because what I find creative, it may have already been done, but it's still creative with me, so I think it's a personal thing too. I always keep people comparing other people's stuff, because that's already been done, so you're not being creative, but you are.
Right. So he's saying it's deeply personal. What's creative to me may not seem creative to somebody else. It may seem crazy or it may seem banal. But to me, it was creative, and it's interesting, and it's something I need and use and want.
I need for different perspectives.
Different perspectives.
Talk about the 4 characteristics of fluency, fluency, frequency, collaboration, and, the idea of idea generation, and then taking an idea, elaborating upon it, and then discerning what is good or not good idea, elaborating.
Good. So really getting into critical thinking, really, is where you're moving with that.
Synthesize.
Synthesizing.
I think sometimes a sense of wonder.
Oh, lovely. Okay, if you haven't seen the movie The Guardians, find children so you have an excuse to go and go to it, because it's about a sense of wonder.
I think you said something like exploration without assumption or constraint.
Nice. Exploration without assumption or constraint. Please.
I'm sorry, so how we discussed like the mind tries to kind of organize everything to create patterns to establish algorithms,
Yes.
right? Which is like that crystallized intelligence.
Uh-huh.
So how does creativity aid in that organization if it actually is breaking apart the parameters that the brain is trying to create?
Right, sorry, you see my little room. Sorry. Actually, I'm going to jump in, if I may, to some of Rex Jung's work, because he's kind of leading the field in looking at what's actually happening in the brain when we're being quote-unquote creative. And in order to study that, you have to have a working definition of creativity. And we'll see if you agree with his. He says, creativity is the quality of human existence that allows us to modify the environment to our needs to make something new and useful. So those 2 criteria of being new and useful. And then saying, however, we acknowledge that useful is subjective. Right? Because is Gnarls Barkley's video useful? Some people would say, no, it doesn't, you don't do anything with it, but it makes me feel really good when I watch it. So to me, it's useful, right? So that's how he defines creativity. And also insisting that creativity goes beyond the visual arts, really is what we're talking about. I want to talk about incorporating the arts into this because technology facilitates artistry in so many different fields. Whether we're talking about visual arts or music, or we're talking about even dance can be enhanced through technology. But I love this. It's an interplay that's going on in the brain between novelty and utility. So what he's found doing studies with individuals engaged in creative tasks is that those parts of the brain that we were just talking about, those responsible parts up here, we're at our most creative when we kind of shut those off. Those are our regulatory and inhibitory parts of our brain, right? They're also very important for critical thinking and problem solving, and that's where this interplay comes about, right? But to have our moments of inspiration and brainstorm and really thinking outside the box, we have to shut down the inhibitions. And this is something that we're struggling with as a culture. I asked you, when was the last time you laughed yourself silly? And very few of us have done so recently. And we laugh ourselves silly when these parts of the brain are shut down and we lose our inhibition. So we're very much an inhibition-centric society right now. And so we're struggling with creativity. But if adolescents don't have fully developed frontal lobes yet, why are they being more creative? Why are they being passive consumers? I saw a hand back there.
I think you answered it. You said this part of the brain, you meant frontal lobe.
Yes.
Okay.
I just gesture wildly at my face and assume you know what that means. Reason.
I was just curious whose research you're referring to.
This is Rex Jung, J-U-N-G. He's at the University of New Mexico. So he studied intelligence for 10 years. And then within the last 7 years, it switched over to studying creativity. And they basically found that there is not a correlation between creativity and intelligence. In fact, the most highly intelligent people are really not very creative. There's this lovely middle ground where if you're of average intelligence, you're pretty darn creative. So there's not a really strong correlation there at all. They're separate things. Please.
I'm sorry. I read about, is it Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences?
Yes.
So he kind of defines creativity as multiple intelligences, but you say they're different.
Well, we're talking specifically about kind of more of the IQ, measurable intelligence, adaptation, answer, yeah.
Do you think it's because it's so difficult to quantify creativity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. It's happening. Again, I'm gesturing wildly at my head. This is happening everywhere. Please.
Hi, I'm just really interested as to why he really felt the need to have useful or utility in the conversation about creativity. To me, those more go toward engineering, whereas when I think of artistry, it's for its own sake. So maybe I'm thinking to myself a word that would feel better than useful might be satisfaction. When artists create, it's for themselves.
Right.
And it does speak to, as one of our other people mentioned, to the personal aspect. And it's interesting that he really felt the need to put in the utility part, which I have not really thought of before.
Right, and I think, I personally believe that that word is so much a culturally influenced word. Because we're basically saying, if what you're making isn't useful, then you're just nuts. Right? So if there's no purpose for it, if it's just like insanity on a page, then is that really creativity? So we could certainly quibble with this definition. I'm all for that. But as a working definition, this is what I went with.
I was going to say, I think it's really helpful to have useful there, because having discussions with different people, it sounded like if you don't have useful, then it seems to be there's no point to creativity. But at the same time, useful is very, very subjective, right? So you create just to create, but that is actually being useful because it's you.
And even as you mentioned up here, the personal aspect of it, the creative process itself, can be very therapeutic and very useful. We have a lot of research about arts-based therapy or arts therapy. Why are we connecting that with what's going on in the human brain and the adolescent development and creativity? There needs to be a connection there. If arts can heal, then maybe they can heal this. And maybe we can use technology to facilitate that. Please.
Well, I have something to add to that. I don't think that there's a huge difference between art and engineering. I think that there's an intertwining there. And traditionally, I think that engineering has been less creative, but I think now it's becoming to be more of an art.
Right. Yeah, and I think engineering, the focus on it, and my husband and I were actually having this exact discussion. So my husband is a senior engineer for Novell, so he makes very boring business database products. Oh, I'm a technologist, and I'm still like, oh my goodness, please stop. But we were talking about why don't girls go into software engineering in particular, and the STEM subjects, and this is a big issue right now. And we were talking about that very issue, that it's not taught as an art. It's taught as a data-driven, isolationist activity, which is not going to appeal to the majority of girls. And maybe not to the majority of people. We're actually seeing severe declines in kids getting interested in computer science, for example. So who's going to give us the next round of technology, I would like to know. So I agree with you. I think they're very, very intertwined. And I also want to know if they carved this apple or did it with their teeth. Okay. All right. Another quote from Rex, and then I'll move on. Humans find meaning in life when allowed to cultivate and express their individuality through creative outlets. Now, when we look at today's adolescents that are so scattered and so anxious, and neglected to inform you that the anxiety and depression rates are higher now in adolescence than they were during the Great Depression. Okay, these kids are anxious, they're scared, they're sad, they're worried. Okay, They crave, like no generation before, relevance and meaning and purpose in what they're learning in school. It's so connected to who they feel they are and their meaning in their life and why they're there. And creativity can foster that. Please.
I teach, in one of my jobs, I teach graduate drawing and painting. I see a common theme among both undergraduate and graduate students in the arts of nostalgia and reaching back into sometimes the past, their history or just unknown old photographs and resources because they want to have that meaning. They want to have a network of meaning within which they fit.
Yes. Beautiful. But technology is evil, right? That's what everybody tells us. That's what all the headlines say. It's evil. It's caused the death of creativity. But I hope you believe. Technology itself is neither good nor bad. It's a thing. It's a thing. Exactly right. So its impact on society really rests on the people who use it and what we are doing with it. And I promised we'd come back to this idea. Our kids have learned, we learn through modeling. We learn by watching others, right? And we don't know what the hell we're doing. We pick up these devices and we're like, what does this do? I don't know. Oh, look, I can check my email. And then we check our email. And that's all we do. Because apparently that's what that device does. Right? So we didn't really, our introduction to technology was not use this new amazing tool to create something that expresses you as an individual and what you've learned in a classroom. It was, oh look, I can watch movies. And our kids have picked up these devices and said, oh look, I can watch movies. Occasionally they'll say, oh look, I can make one too. Right? So they've become devices for entertainment, not out of malice and not because the technology is bad, but because both we and they don't really know what's possible. We just don't. We don't have the time to figure it out. And so we're left in this very vicious cycle of using technology passively, which alters our brains, which then makes us more passive, and we're going downhill. So technology is a tool. That's what that word means. I put it in my dissertation and got in trouble for it. But that's what that word means. Technology is a tool. And perhaps the ultimate tool if we're going to create and distribute things that are new and useful. Unfortunately, the majority of things that people create with technology are not particularly useful. I don't know, you could argue with me. Let me show you an example. Okay, now we can laugh ourselves silly. Good. Perfect. All right. I don't know that I would be thrilled if one of my students brought this in as a class project. So, go ahead.
So does that type, how we discussed earlier, like if it's insanity on a sheet of paper, is it really creativity? So is that like similar to that, what we were discussing?
Open to interpretation.
Like,
I think this would be a different view of utility. So, yeah, it makes us laugh, but does it really further society or knowledge or anything like that? So, again, that definition of useful is certainly subjective.
And it's prioritizing.
Yes.
I mean, you can use technology in all sorts of ways, but like with everything else, you have to prioritize. I don't think that's the next option.
Exactly, excellent point. So we need to prioritize the ways we're using technology. We could spend 20 minutes making a video of our cat doing this, or we could spend 20 minutes recording, for example, a public service announcement about reducing prejudice in our schools.
But if you've already done that, then you can make a video about it.
Exactly.
Maybe you have 2 or 3-year-olds that are exploring keyboard activities. This would be wonderful.
Very true.
And the black kids are what they do first.
Exactly right. Sir.
I guess in the end, I heard a few people kind of making comments about how is this different than the original Gnarls Barkley video you're showing. That was the first time that anybody thought to put that together. This isn't a novel video.
Yes.
And so then that's another debate on the second term. We weren't really debating new before, we were debating useful or value, but, and not to slow things down, it's just the novelty is to whom? Is it to the general audience, to the individual? Those things matter as well, but I think that's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah.
What she was mentioning.
If you love this video, go to Reddit. There's a whole thread on cute animal videos. Okay?
Just a quick comment though, then, based on your comment though, are you saying there's a right or wrong with creativity? Are you going to say, oh no, you're not creative?
No. I'm not
going to say that to
yeah.
my students. To say
I'm never going to
you're
get
not
anywhere
creative.
near that.
Right.
No. For me, as an educator, I want the focus to be, how can I have my kids create in a way that also deepens their learning?
Yes.
So for me, as an educator, is that particularly useful? No. If they want to do that in their spare time and they're being creative and having outlets and having fun, am I okay with that? Sure. But I want to show my kids a richer way of using technology.
Well, I teach video and filmmaking, so from my perspective, no, I don't want to see a cat playing piano, but at the same time, maybe the shot is a good shot or something, so the kids are doing something. I think it's a personal thing. If some kid made this and he thought it was incredibly creative, then it is.
Yeah.
And it's not compared to Gnarls Barkley because not everybody can do that. I don't want to see it compared to, I don't want to see people compared to each other.
Good. Beautiful. Please, put in back.
So I was just thinking, about that Coney video. Probably popular that became and how that had a voice for people that don't have a voice and what have you. But, the process of how somebody becomes comfortable with technology, maybe by making cat videos, that's an endangered a voice and they have something to say.
You're exactly right.
I think that's part of the artistic process, is that you take risks with the art and then you bring your intelligence and knowledge to it.
Beautiful. And it's going to be developmental from both an exposure to technology standpoint and from an age standpoint. And actually, I want to take us through a little regression for a minute, if I may, because what are some visions that we have for how technology could be used? So if you have lots of money and talent and skill with technology, you can create things like Bear 71. We'll see how fast our internet connection is, and we'll see if I can show this to you for real. Don't worry, we won't watch all 20 minutes. Oh, that's the rest of my presentation. You're noticing, I hope, these little messages that are coming up to the side. There's passive video, and then there's Bear 71. Resize my window here so I can use some video. First of all, how many of us get to see video of grizzly bears very often? Okay, so we've got some video about tranquilizing bears and whatnot, but then we get into some cool stuff. So that's just one of many videos we can watch here. This is a project where they're actually tracking the movements of, see here's Bear 71 moving around. And we can go in and watch additional videos and see live webcams.
There are 15 remote sensing cameras in my home range, plus infrared counters and barbed wire snags to collect my hair. I call it the grid.
And there are a number of other instructional materials and interactive materials on here as well. You can talk with the people that are working out in the field with these animals. It's all integrated into this beautiful system of video and interaction and dialogue. Okay? Anybody ever wondered how our galaxy was formed? We can now watch it happen. And now we have headlines, although we've been reading about how technology is killing us all, telling us that, well, maybe technology can actually save the world. Can solve all of the problems. Everything from simply tagging a picture to tweeting to developing new technologies to track endangered species, as we just saw. It has this grand potential. Now, I don't know about you. I am a technologist and I cannot do any of the stuff you just saw. I don't have that skill set. All right? I work with kids on using technology, and the products that we create with children look very, very different from these for the most part. Right? So what can they do? Well, first of all, starting with their social media that they're using. Grassroots effort from the kids themselves. Nobody told them to do this. Across college campuses, across the nation, they're starting positive Facebook pages for the universities, where they'll come on and say, did you hear about what George did last week? Isn't that so cool? They're giving each other compliments and highlighting the positive about what they're doing. Now, we could argue about whether or not that's creative, but if I look at the definition as new and useful, well, that is certainly a new way of using Facebook, and don't tell the kid that just got a compliment that that's not useful. So to me, for them to think of using a technology that has been harped on as being a place for cyberbullying to be facilitated and encouraged, and then take it and use it in this positive way, I think that's quite extraordinary. There's a teen technology project, a group of teenagers who work with nonprofit organizations to get them equipment to help them create marketing materials, using technology, commercials, all kinds of things. So they'll use their tech resources and skills to help nonprofit organizations market themselves, get the word out, and get support. Okay, so yeah, these kids are carrying their cameras around in their pockets at all times. They're starting to think about how to use them for good in really positive ways. Okay, I do have to tell you, this one's hilarious. Okay, sorry. I hope you'll be able to hear it. I don't know if you will. Don't know how many of you are Lady Gaga fans. Our teachers told us in second grade to be herpetologists. These kids took everything they've learned about snakes in second grade and made a public service announcement to teach us all not to fear them. That's awesome. I think that's incredible. But do you see, yeah, this isn't an interactive video where we can click and follow the tracks of the snake. It's what they could do. So now we're starting to move into a realm where we're using technology in creative and powerful ways, whether or not you enjoy seeing snakes that are around the screen. All right, so a couple of other kind of fun examples. Digital storytelling. I don't know how many of you have been exposed to this movement, but it's extremely powerful. Whether they're making videos about things they're learning, or telling their own story about who they are and what their identity is, or actually telling a story that they've written but now in digital form with pictures and with music and enhancements. We're taking these kids' voices and giving them a venue to be heard, is what's happening. And it scares us, a lot of us, because we hear, first of all, the word digital, and then we understand that the end product is a movie, and some of us kind of crumple in on ourselves and start rocking in the corner. I don't know how to do that. But there are extraordinarily simple tools, free and simple tools to create digital stories. If you have a Mac, you've got it. It's iMovie. I can make a digital story in a few minutes. On my slide that I had up there a minute ago, it said Independence High School down at the bottom. I'm currently working with our alternative high school in the city that I live in. So this is a high school for kids who've been kicked out of their traditional high schools. They're trying to finish up their diplomas. One of our students just came to class the other day. She's 14 years old. She's like, guess what? I'm going to have a baby. And we just sit there and go, I don't know how to respond to that, but okay. Okay, that's the answer that we give. So these kids struggle and they have very, very difficult lives. And they come into Miss Gina, I'm helping Miss Gina with her class, her senior English class, for example. And they're supposed to write a research paper. 2 of her seniors go to college each year. Yeah. The rest end up working at McDonald's and, cleaning the cleaning business for their families or whatever. So convincing them to write a 10-page research paper is somewhat challenging. So what we're doing with these kids is they get to choose a topic. Basically what we want them to do is to learn to use resources wisely, right? To look at internet resources, to look at articles and say, okay, is this a credible source? Is this information accurate? I mean, that's what we really want from research. And I'm not at all devaluing writing, because I believe in the profound impact of writing on people. But at this point in these kids' education, that's a struggle for a lot of them. So what they're doing is doing all of the research and taking notes, and they have to find credible sources and write those down, but they can choose their topic. I don't care if they learn about the French Revolution for this particular thing, right? So they can choose what they want. Guess what these kids chose? The history of hip-hop. They chose Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. They chose Anne Frank. These are the things these kids are choosing. And they want to know about it. So they chose their topic, they go and do the research, they bring it back, and then instead of writing a 10-page paper, we make a movie. And they find pictures about the person or the event or the topic, and we are fortunate enough to have a little tray of iPads, and you can get the iPad iMovie app for about $6. Pop it on there, they go tap, and it puts the pictures in. They hold their tap a little longer, and then they can move their picture. And then they go out in the hall, and they hit record, and it's their voice. And they tell the story of Rosa Parks, or they tell the story of the history of hip-hop. And I got to sit in the hall with this awesome little senior, and I call him little, okay, as he learned about some of the great figures in the hip-hop movement. And he did not know that Snake Legs was a dancer in 1925 that started the hip-hop movement. He was like, what? That's so cool! And he found a picture of him, and he was dancing like this, and we all wondered how on earth you bend your knees in that direction. And he was lit up doing this. And the end product is a movie about the history of hip-hop with his voice as the narration. He's so excited about that. Okay?
Dr. Cox,
Please.
a comment?
Yes, of course.
You said he was so lit up.
Yeah.
So if you were doing a brain MRI, I mean, that section of his brain would be...
We would see activity everywhere.
Yes.
Yes.
He's interested in doing something that he wants to do, and he has the ability, he has the equipment to do it.
Yes. And if you've read any of Judy Willis's work on rad teaching, if you haven't, if you're an educator, by all means. This is rad teaching, Judy Willis, W-I-L-L-I-S. She may be here. She's probably doing a workshop right now. Sorry, you're stuck with me. You're going to leave right now, like, whoa. But her work focuses on, well, she was a neuroscientist and became a math teacher, a junior high math teacher. As a result of a lot of things she was seeing in her work, and she wanted to see if she could make a difference in the classroom, like you are all trying to do. And so she's using her neuroscience background to inform her instruction. And so a lot of what she talks about is that when kids are having fun and they're engaged and they're connected with what they're learning, the flood of dopamine that then bathes the brain is making connections everywhere and reinforcing learning and engaging them in ways that we can't possibly do with a lecture and a test. It's not going to happen.
I just have a question about it, because I'm all about all this stuff, and I'm teaching the students. I run an art education club, and I'm teaching my students how to be teachers. The tricky part about this is that we had a big discussion about this, is when they're using other imagery, how do you teach them to document it?
Right.
And do you have that discussion about, like, we talked about mashups, visual and audio, and all the kind of mashups and all the cool stuff happening. You know, so I'm curious, could you just, for just a brief moment, with your students in that scenario, how you ask them to document site sources?
Sure. So the first thing I always teach my students to do is to use Creative Commons or to use the advanced search on Google where you can search for open license works.
Okay.
So that's the first thing I always do. Now we can't always get a good crop of images when we do that, but we can try. So that's creativecommons.org is one place you can go to look. And then if you go into like Google Images, go to the advanced search. I'm doing it in my head again. I'm envisioning the page. Okay. Down at the bottom of the advanced search, you can say what kind of license you want. And so I have them check the free to use, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's the free to use one. Okay? So that's a really good place to start. But then if we can't use copyright-free works, what are our options? If we're keeping the movies within the classroom for an educational purpose, I can actually use them to my heart's content. So if the fair use guidelines are such that if kids are creating projects for a class that will not be widely distributed, meaning it's just kept in the class or in the student's portfolio, then they're okay.
So they're not posting them. We know that they're not posting.
Correct. And with this particular group of students, I'm not sending them out to post their videos on YouTube, right? If we want a little bit wider distribution, we'll actually start to talk about emailing people to ask, hey, I'm doing this project for school, and which is great to improve their communication skills. So we talk about digital ethics, email the people, may I use this image for my project, and or we'll always create a credits page at the end. And so we'll take the link for the image and put it in a credits page at the end of the video.
Just because one of the things that I see happen a lot in like high school classroom is that the teachers take the kids to the computer lab, they ask them to find an image, and then the kids copy it, draw it. They don't do anything to alter it or give credit, and then they claim that artwork is their own.
Right.
And I have a real issue with that because I think it's not teaching them to use it wisely and discerning. So, and I think that's an important part of technology and access to information.
Now what's fun about a project like this too is that I can turn it around and make it a lesson on exactly what you're talking about. So if I take all of their videos and then I mash them up and I present it as, guys, look at this amazing video I made. They're like, no, I made it. No, it's mine. Then they start to see, wait, I worked hard on that. And they start to get really frustrated. It's actually a very good lesson in digital ethics. It's a fun one. It's a fun one. All right, we can have kids making music. Again, you've got it for free. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you're not on a PC, if you want to do digital storytelling, Photo Story 3 is a free download that you can use to make very simple digital stories. So it's Photo Story 3, or you may or may not already have installed, but it comes for free with your operating system, Windows Movie Maker. It's a little bit trickier to use. It's at a similar level of iMovie. But all of those are fairly easy tools and free tools.
Excuse me, Photo Story 3, like the number, or is it the number or spell
Yeah,
out?
it's the number. I'm so throwing things.
And then it's Windows Movie Maker.
Yep. All right, now for creating music or podcasts, I love allowing kids to just come over to the laptop and they can create a vidcast right in iMovie so they can teach me about something they just learned. Put it in there. Vlogs. Vlogs are another great option. Video logs.
Oh, video logs.
Yeah. So it's like a journal, but they get to say it instead of having to write it. Again, I'm not downing writing. I'm just saying some alternatives to the written word because we do tend to be very listen and write heavy in today's school. Vlogging is this great option for kids to sit down and reflect on what they're learning. Now, I was a language teacher. I was a Spanish teacher. If you see me muttering to myself at the front of the room, it's in Spanish. It's very entertaining. It's the only time I speak Spanish anymore is when I'm berating myself. My kids have learned to fear it. Because I only speak Spanish when I'm mad. I'm like, vente ahorita tú. And they're like, oh. All right. But for expressing their language abilities, sit down in front of the computer, do a quick vlog. We're good. Go with it. Again, free tools. iMovie. We've got GarageBand if you're on a PC. Again, there's an app for that. And if you're on a Mac, or I'm switching my platforms, aren't I? Okay, if you're on a Mac, it's GarageBand. If you're on a PC, the free download is Audacity. A-U-D-A-C-I-T-Y. Audacity. All right, so some very, very simple tools to create fairly simple projects. I'll show just a couple more, and then we are going to need to take a break, yeah? Yeah. Okay, so you're thinking, this is great for older kids. Here are our first graders. Okay? So we saw some incredibly complex technological interventions, and first graders can't do that. But they can use the drawing tools. And they're learning how to type, so they can type a few words. So this is an alphabet book about the Wizard of Oz. So they're taking what they learned, and they're taking their letters, and they're drawing pictures. These pictures were done in a program called KidPix.
There's Toontastic. There's quite a few we use in reception class.
Oh, excellent.
So there's quite a lot.
Yes. Okay? This one's disgusting. I don't like it. And I study brains. I study brains, and I don't like this one. It looks like it's made of hamburger. I'm very disturbed by it. Okay. All right. So these are not profoundly difficult, and it comes back to something very simple that kids do all the time, which is drawing. We've simply moved it to the digital medium. Yeah. Couple more. I love this one. I think it's hilarious. Okay, so we get a lot of examples that are more language arts, more social studies based. It makes sense to do digital storytelling, for example, with language arts or with social studies. But what about math? Math's a little trickier. So here's Chloe's adventure. Oh, she went to a cool place. Story problems. So they've created their own story problems, and they're trying to help Chloe get through her little maze. Now they've got some little friends. So they created these little scaffolds within the system, these little reminders. What operation should she do? Look for keywords. So these are all tips and hints that we give kids when they're trying to solve word problems, but they've built these into their little complex story world that they created.
What software?
That one I'm not sure, actually. I need to find out. This one is just another example of digital storytelling. I'm not going to take too long on it, but I wanted to show that the graphics don't have to be complex for the technology to be compelling. Okay, so they're very basic watercolor paintings that they're just moving around on, but he's telling the story of immigrating from Cambodia, and the purpose of this video, is to try and prevent Cambodian kids from joining gangs. That's the objective, to remind them of their heritage and where they came from, and to keep them out of a dangerous lifestyle. All right, so wrapping it back up, we've not modeled the most appropriate uses of technology, and what students really need to move from passive consumption to creative production is some direction. That's all they need. So we need to start creating these collaborative technological spaces that foster creativity. And I know that's a struggle for us because a lot of us don't know how to do that. And we don't know what those spaces might look like. So I'm going to show you in the second half of the presentation today a model that you can use to start to create some of these spaces. But don't discount the skills that your students do have. Because some of them know how to make a video, they just make it about cats. And they know how to create a Facebook page, but they just create their own profile. So they've got some of the skills. They just have never been directed into using them in an amazing way. What I have hated for the last 15 years of my career is watching this forced separation between technology and the arts and real education, right? You've got to learn to read, write, and math. We want you to engage in the arts, and you should probably pick up some digital literacy. And so as I talked to my son the other day, he said, oh, I've got computers today. My son's in 2nd grade. I've got computers today. Oh, what are you going to be doing? Oh, we just do our math drills. That's what he does when he goes to computers. What? What? if computers is a separate class, then why is it not a collaborative effort between the teacher of the regular classroom and the lab coordinator saying, okay, my kids right now are learning about figures from the Civil War. Will you help them create a digital scrapbook for their character from the Civil War in PowerPoint? I mean, it doesn't have to be hard technologies, right? The technology that's used doesn't matter. It's not going to exist 5 years from now anyway. What matters is that the kids are starting to think, oh, technology is a tool that can facilitate my creative thinking and my productive output. So I don't care what technology they use, but if we have this collaborative relationship and they're doing amazing things in their tech class, or I just say, get rid of the tech class and we'll do it as part of what I do every day, then that's going to be much more meaningful. If they can go out and find examples of the patterns they're learning about in 1st and 2nd grade, instead of doing the 84th worksheet on recognizing patterns. Okay, so we've all heard of people who die playing World of Warcraft. This literally happens. Okay? There have been a few, in particular young gentlemen, who can't stop playing. Literally get addicted to it and they waste away to nothing at the end of time. So you may be confused and perhaps appalled that this is on here. But there are high school teachers now that are using World of Warcraft, which, by the way, is the most popular in the history of the world multi-user online gaming environment. So kids basically get to be a character on there, and they are immersed in this world of orcs and elves and dragons and whatnot. Okay? And they go on quests, and they form guilds. My daughter's learning about the medieval period right now. I'm like, dude, get it all. Okay. So it's very immersive. You can communicate with people. I mean, it's interactive. So one teacher in particular that I was just reading about this week has taken the Common Core for language arts and connected it with World of Warcraft. So his kids play World of Warcraft as part of their instruction. And so, for example, they were learning about riddle poetry. So they had to go and do research about riddle poetry, and then they had to go into World of Warcraft and share their notes about what they learned with their guild, so their guild would know what riddle poetry was. And then they had to create riddle poems about Azeroth, the world that is the World of Warcraft. Okay? Azeroth riddle poems. And then once they had theirs done, they could post the riddle poems as part of quests for other people, and if they could solve their riddle, then they could continue on their own. Come on, right? So it's taking something the kids are doing that we kind of perceive as, oh, it's a video game, and making it this immersive learning experience that's directly connected to core. So the message here is that integration is key. It can't be a separate piece. So if we are going to use technology to foster creativity, to reintegrate the arts into our curriculum, and to deepen understandings, then it has to be seamlessly integrated. It cannot be a separate piece. I'm going to encourage you to start using it yourself. Right? The more we can use technology in creative ways, the more our students can see that it can be more productive. There is a spectacular, I'll have to put it up for you, there's a spectacular digital story, for example, that a teacher made that's simply a retelling of the Gettysburg Address. It's spectacular because they've taken original images from the Civil War, and particularly from the Battle of Gettysburg, and laid them over this profound speech, where he's talking about the men who gave their lives and sacrificed for the country, and here they are, laid out in front of you. And you can't tell me that if an adolescent saw that, and then began a unit on the Civil War, or on the aftermath of that it wouldn't touch something in them and inspire them in a different way.
I think it's useful. It seems to me like the next step then is to take this and ground it back into the real world in some way.
Yes.
You know, like the whole Warcraft thing, like the next step would be for them then to take that and to look into their personal lives or things happening in contemporary culture and then start making little poems about that.
Exactly.
So there's the bigger world connection.
Yes. Yes, exactly right. So the message here is that we need to model, we need to integrate, and we also need to keep in mind that we're educating for the unknown. As you have already said, we don't know what their jobs are going to be. Isn't that strange to think about? I am educating them for careers that don't exist. I am teaching them, hoping that they'll be able to use technologies that don't exist. So we really are preparing them for an unknown world. But if we're teaching them to think deeply and critically and creatively, then we'll get them there. So what we're going to do is take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to start into what is this tightrope, and she has this, I'm going to pay you later for the transition, because that's exactly it. How do we immerse them in these productive uses of technology without taking away the social skills and the critical thinking and the real world component? All right, so we'll see you back in...
It's 10:45.
15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for your time. What I know yeah, it seems like it's very
and it's very accurate. It's kind of in large part how you guys are using technology to create like that space, like the World of Warcraft, where then well, I created something similar to the
I'm a little passionate about what I do. Tell me.
I am too. That's why I was like, so what happened is I kind of experimented with it because I was very hyperactive. And then I just became like I started getting asked to read out and then I started teaching them. And it's not because I was a great person, I was just very passionate about it. But then it got to the point where then I was allowed to teach poetry, teach poetry. I thought it was very similar to what's going on right now, what we're discussing about I was talking to my 6th grade teacher about it, and I felt like let me know because I was like, you're a particular type of student, and education system, everybody is kind of like, well, what would you do? So I kind of get my speech, but it was very like, wow, I gotta talk to people. So then I walked out, and I bumped into another teacher who was more artistic, so I was still on fire, and you know, I gave speeches, I started walking. So I went from February to the end of the school year, and did really well, but she retired. And the second year, I asked them back, but then it expanded because of the initial success. 2 6th grade classes, a 5th grade, and a 3rd grade class. And I was just the guy that wrote poetry. I'm not a teacher. So it really expanded my ability to communicate with so many different age ranges. Long story short, when the third year came around, they were kind of like, okay, so now what are you doing though? What are you saying? What are you saying is going to happen? You're going to demonstrate it? Because like, we see what you're doing. So long story short, this is where I ended up here. And then I have like my whole life, I created it into a nonprofit. So like we just have that technology thing that really helps. And so it's just really interesting seeing like the comparison between your type of technology program and it's very similar to I'm trying to do poetry. And that's probably why I have something. It's like that one that's growing up.
No, not at all.
Did you want to speak to it?
Just quickly, go ahead. You know, I had like a really excellent question. I'm trying to use this kind of do as a podcast. And what I'm struggling with, and I'm is a way, as an online resource to sort of collect all of the stuff that we're working on so that kids can access it. Because my problem is I have a laptop, the iPad, and they use it in class, and then they don't have it. And they don't, haven't gotten to the step yet where like an organized
It's a piece of the puzzle.
you know, some sort of sense of collaborators that we can involve in these. You know, like you have, is there a wiki for
Yeah, wikis are, well, it depends on if you're going to post them for them or if you want all of them to post them for themselves.
I think ultimately,
Yeah, you probably need to use some kind of wiki system for that, so wiki spaces.
The framework that she's clear.
Yeah, but you can also, what I've done with a lot of my students is just created private YouTube channels and then invited them all to the YouTube channel because that allows everybody to upload them. It's a little bit easier to manage as long as you know your students and they understand that they're only to post stuff for your class. Yeah.
Cool. Great. Thanks.
Sure.
Great.
Very quickly,
Oh. I don't use it very often, but
It looks like somebody,
I think it's
someone else is
possible.
using it. Someone else.
Really?
I don't know how, but that's what I was trying to find,
No, I'm
unless
like-
you have a picture of a man.
No. Well, I had a little surgery for my
And she has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
So fascinating. I used to be an elementary school teacher, and I
You do that right now?
Yeah.
You have a course?
I do. I'll grab it for you.
Awesome.
We're
It doesn't need to be
downstairs
right
as
now.
well. Yeah. What's your name?
My name is Ruben.
Ruben.
I'm doing something similar where I was discussing with her, we're using a poetry program as the way of integrating the arts into like the science-based education, which is because in my perspective, like poetry is just a documentation of.
Right.
So, okay, fine, science is very important. Okay, well, teach them to write poetry about the science as a way of introducing them because it creates an emotional attachment on which the cognitive intelligence will build. Precisely.
how she mentioned, like when you establish like a personal connection with, they're more receptive to learn. It removes the inhibition. And but to take it to the next step, where so the program was in the classroom and it had success. But building off that success, we're turning it into an actual nonprofit. So we wanted to offer more than just doing the class teaching. And then so we introduced I learned a word when I went to the Radcliffe semester called intrapreneurship.
Intra?
Yeah. So it's no, actually. So you would think, well, in a sense it is. So entrepreneur kind of surveys a community, identifies the need, and then creatively meets the need. What an entrepreneur does is they work within an existing business to find the needs that the business themselves have, and then they work. So they're the creative mind that innovates the business. So for us, teaching poetry and how to use arts to understand science and then creating art out of science, we're training them to then be able to apply that ability by teaching them entrepreneurial skills in a creative manner.
So we're very interested. We have a program that's called Kids Movies. So the kids are working in teams, and these are 3rd to 8th grade kids. They're learning about basically how to run a business through the movie production industry. So it would be really interesting to integrate your idea and have them make a video or a movie that is taking the poetry and science and turning that into a video or movie.
That would be your proof that they've been asking.
Exactly. I just talked to my friend actually. He was working for like 6 years in editing. Yes. But we obviously don't have it as advanced as you guys do, because that's precisely what we want to do. And especially because the way the program goes is we have the discussion phase that leads into the research phase where you identify what's important and then build off of it. And then that builds into the curriculum phase, because then we're okay, what are we really trying to say? But while one team is doing the curriculum building, the other team is storyboarding to create the video based off of the curriculum that we're making. And we want to make little 5 to 6 little minute shorts on each curriculum that we make, so that when teachers ask, so what does your poetry look like in the classroom or something like that? We have this little short. It sounds like
we're really interested in collaborating.
Where is that?
We're right here in San Francisco. We're actually right down the hill from the Fairmont.
Excellent.
Grabbing my cover.
Please, that is amazing.
Did we figure it out?
I'm at Dr. Cox, at Dr. Susie Cox. Yes.
That was your email?
No, that's my Twitter.
And
I don't tweet very often.
You email more?
Yes.
Okay.
My email is dr.
S-U-Z-I?
Y.
Y?
At Gmail.
Here we go.
And I promise I'm not that stuck on my title. It's not any way I can ever get my name without having numbers at the end.
For what you have to do to be a doctor, I'll be wearing a necklace, the old school 80s
When I got my degree, I was like, not only certain individuals I'm going to make me call me doctor.
Okay,
like
that's
the
humble.
people that tried to oppress me as a woman trying to go
That's right.
Then I'll be like, no, you need to.
So, if you could just like nutshell it real quick, just how would you present it quickly for like an at-risk community, like Law Puente? Because, for instance, I took 4 child development classes in the last semester because our program at my junior college is very like cognitive developmental based. It's very human development. It's not like teaching them how to work. It's very like progressive. But I know that a big part of it. Oh man, I lost my train of thought. What did I start saying?
How we could kind of condense it down into a nutshell to introduce it to at-risk population.
Oh, okay. So when we were learning like different elements of child development, and this in particular was it was a class that dealt specifically with the relationship between the child student, the teacher, and the parent, and how the teacher educates the parent to educate the child. So we were kind of, I guess, discussing like abuse in the home, and she was really adamant like a child should not be subjected to abuse, and they should be removed from the environment, and this, that, and the other. Which, of course, you can't dispute that. But realistically speaking, I'm not going to go on a crusade in La Puente and kick down every door for abused kids. It's tough. It's difficult for someone like me, but we have to accept that there's going to be abused students. So I was trying to bring up the point
well, what if you did have to accept the fact that they're interviewing? And she wouldn't go beyond that point. She just would like cut me off, and then it became like weird in the classroom. So from a more like, I guess, expanded perspective, you know, what kind of advice would you give, like based off of what I explained to you I'm trying to do? How would you kind of interface that?
Between the reality of the homes these kids are from and then what?
Technology, like kind of, because that would be, because I definitely, I see what you're saying, and I'm a believer in it, but how would I implement that in an at-risk community?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
To me, especially with at-risk populations, it's all about voice. It's about giving kids a chance to be heard.
Right.
Because that's a lot of what's going on. They just feel like nobody hears me.
Right.
There's no point in anything I'm saying. So one of the things I'm doing with these kids at Independence High School is that our next unit that we're going into is on human rights. And so we're reading the book Soul, and we're watching some videos, and finishing up already, and they're going to podcast their own inhabiting speech, which then segues into their senior project, which is a biographical video, where they talk about who they are as individuals, where they're going, and how what they're going to do will contribute to the dream they have for the future.
That's great.
So something like that, where they get to feel empowered and have some choice and have a voice. I mean, those types of moments are what we focus on, because it is, I mean, you don't have as much access to the technology, they're going home to bad situations a lot of the time, and so we can't necessarily do everything. But if we can pick a few things like that make them feel empowered and like they have a voice.
So to really kind of do like an indirect approach, because we're education, right? They emphasize cognitive skills and kind of neglect affective. But if we then,
the core does, yes.
right? So, but being like a supplemental program, we have the ability to focus on the affective.
Yeah, and actually, the more we can focus on the affect, the more the kids will learn. So they'll pick the cognitive skills up if we're enhancing their emotional intelligence and if we're making them feel safe.
Right. Are you familiar with Professor Imordino Yang?
Oh yes.
I love her.
I love Helen.
Right? Because that's exactly right there.
Yeah.
She's actually why I'm here, because I was just a kid on La Puente, and I emailed her with my little thing, I'm here who I am, and she sent me 3 of her papers. One of them is on what she's presenting today.
Awesome.
And then when I met with her, I was able to, yeah, she's presenting today actually later on tonight. And her papers would allow me to like explain my poetry program in a more neuroscientific way, and it just really, you guys keep doing what you're doing, please.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.